Mary Hollingsworth is author of more than 150 Christian books and editions, which have been traditionally published. Her books have appeared on bestseller lists more than 100 times. 3 of her books have sold more than 1 million copies each. In her 37 years in Christian publishing, Mary has served as a managing editor for such authors as Max Lucado, Billy Graham, Charles Swindoll, Sheila Walsh, Thelma Wells, and many others. She has also won numerous literary awards, such as Howard Books Spiritual Development Award, the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association Gold Book Award twice, and the ECPA Platinum Book Award twice. She has also received the Global Media Summit's Platform Award for Excellence in Communications. Mary currently serves as president and publisher of Creative Enterprise Studios, which hosts almost 300 highly experienced freelancers who work through CES for major Christian publishers, such as HarperCollins, Zondervan, Thomas Nelson, Harvest House, and others. Mary is a President's Club member of Christian Women in Media, and she serves a music outreach ministry leader for her church. You can see her full publishing history at her website, maryhollingsworth.com. And you can see how her name is spelled on the screen if you want to make note of that and visit her website. Mary, welcome. And I am always thrilled when people who have as much knowledge as you do are willing to speak to our small group. Thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tina. And in conclusion, I just thought I'd begin with the part of my presentation you're probably most looking forward to. But it is an honor for me to be with you today, and I appreciate Tina inviting me to speak. I hope I can share some things that will be valuable to you. So let me start by saying congratulations to those of you who have embarked on one of the world's noblest tasks, and that task is writing and producing a book or a story or something you have in mind to do. As you've no doubt discovered, producing a book is not for sissies. It's a huge task, and it requires a lot of what I call seat time. To complete a full-length manuscript, you really have to stay in your seat and write. And in today's crazy, busy society, that's not easy, is it? Well, as you probably know, Tina asked me to speak today because of my new book. Hope you can see this. It is called The First Time Author Survival Guide. The subtitle is Everything You Need to Know to Publish Your Book, but Don't Know to Ask. And while this book was specifically written for first-time authors, I'm happy to say that reviewers are suggesting that it belongs on every author's reference shelf. And that is my hope, that it will be useful to people. So I'll point out some of the features of the book as we go along, but I'll do my best not to turn this into one long commercial. Instead, what I'd like to do is offer some practical information that I've gained in Christian publishing over the last 37 years. During those years, I've been privileged to serve as an author, a managing editor, a production editor, a marketing copywriter, a copy editor, a proofreader, and anything else that nobody else wanted to do. So I've done just about everything you can think of in publishing, and I have loved it. I've been blessed to work with many of the top authors in our industry. And from those amazing books and author relationships, I've learned a lot about what works and what doesn't work when you're writing Christian books. Also, I'm a member of several groups for writers, publishers, authors, literary agents, and others on social media. And some of those groups are primarily for new or first-time authors. And what really prompted me to write this book were being involved in those groups. I often see new authors asking legitimate questions, perfectly legitimate questions for new authors. And I either see them berated by other people, or I see other first-time authors trying to give first-time authors advice about how to publish and write books. And I think, as the Bible says, when the blind lead the blind, they kind of both fall in the ditch. And there are lots of ditches on the road to publication. It makes me really sad to see those sincere new Christian writers who are trying to do what God has called them to do being misled, and they don't even realize it. So I decided I would try to provide at least one resource with some reliable, tried and true answers to the questions that new authors really need to know. And sometimes they don't even know they need to know it. So I'm hoping this will help. Any of you relate to that out there?
Well, yes.
I can see. Well, so let me ask you, first of all, do you want your work to be a ministry or a paying business? Now, I know your inclination as good Christians is to give me the answer that you think is appropriate and that I want to hear, and that would be ministry. Christian authors often say to me, it's really not about the money. But I often also see how sad they are and defeated and disappointed when their book doesn't sell well. It reminds me of the story of the Bible teacher at a youth camp. He asked the question to his young campers, well, what has gray fur, a long fluffy tail, pointed ears, climbs trees, and hides nuts for the winter? And one little boy said, well, it sure sounds like a squirrel, but I guess I should say Jesus. Well, the truth is, I believe creating Christian products can be both a ministry and a business. They are not mutually exclusive. And hopefully it will always be a type of ministry if you're trying to share God's word in some creative, publishable form. So, but Matthew 10:10 also says, a workman is worthy of his hire. In other words, a workman, in our case, an author, deserves to be paid for what they do. It's okay to be paid to write for the Lord, just as it's okay for a minister to be paid to preach. It's how we survive to write another day and continue the ministry of helping other people. Well, here's just one bit of advice that I would offer you about the business side of ministry. If you treat your ministry as a business, it will probably pay you as a business. If you treat your ministry just as a hobby, it'll probably pay you as a hobby. So if you want to just play at a career at writing and expect to write the all-time American novel at one time in your life and retire on the proceeds, I have a little bad news for you. It just doesn't kind of work like that. Sorry. Well, I've been a freelance Christian writer and editor, project director since 1988. And I've been blessed to be able to support myself. But I've worked extremely hard to do that. Long hours and heavy deadlines and very few real vacations. Tired, bleary eyes. They're called editor's eyes. But I also have a light, peaceful heart and a joyful spirit because I get to do what I love for the one I love. And it is my spiritual sweet spot. And perhaps it is yours too. I hope it is. So I have to tell you, if you're looking for a get-rich-quick scheme, you'd better probably pick something else because it's unlikely that Christian publishing will provide that for you. But if you're looking for a way to serve the Lord, if you're looking for a way to help other people, if you're looking for a life that's truly rewarding and full of joy, then come on in. The water's fine. You know, publishers are always looking for great books to publish and products to produce. That's what they do. So they're always looking for those things. And to them, it is both a business and a ministry. So just so you know what to expect as we go along, let me say, I know some of you are publishing your works independently, and that's perfectly fine. In fact, the First Time Author Survival Guide was an independent project. The questions I most often am asked, and I see asked on social media, have to do more with traditional publishing. So my book is primarily deals with that, and I will primarily be talking about that publishing path today, although I can assure you that most of the information applies to whatever publishing path you choose to go down. Also, because I can't cover all the different genres of books today, I'll mostly be talking about nonfiction books because they are the most common books written, and therefore they are the bread and butter of the publishing industry. However, again, most of those guidelines and suggestions I'll be making will apply to most all genres, so don't tune out if you're writing something else. So let's talk about a second question. What is your job as a Christian author? What is your job? Let's say you've decided to pursue both the ministry and the business of writing. Exactly what is your job as a Christian author in the publishing business? First of all, it's fairly obvious that your job as an author is to write. Now, most of the time, that's all we want to do, okay? But that's not all there is to it. You want to use your words to serve God and to serve his people. You want to share the message God has specifically appointed you to share. You want to inspire and lead and love people through your words and through your writing. You want to help save the lost. That is your job. And it can also be your joy. Have you ever noticed that the two words job and joy only have one letter's difference? If you're doing what you love, then it will be both, in my opinion. Well, secondly, an author's job is to understand and fit into the established publishing process. And once your book is written and under contract and submitted to the publisher, your job is not to control every detail of what happens to your work as it goes on through the publishing processes. Your role is to fit into that publishing process, not to change it or run it. Other people are gifted and paid to do that. So you can trust their God-given talents to help you. The publishing process, honestly, it's been refined for centuries, and it worked really well. Our job as authors is to fit into that process. And I'll tell you that authors who do that well, they are respected by the publishing professionals and are often requested to do additional books. And frankly, authors who don't work well within the system, but they're constantly asking for special favors and changes to the process and all of those things, they are rarely asked to do a second book, at least not with that publisher. So there is a protocol and there is an etiquette in the publishing industry that identifies professionals from beginners. So what you want to do is learn that protocol and observe that etiquette so you come across as a professional as well. Well, third, an author's job is to meet your deadlines. Now that may seem trivial, but I have to tell you that one of the most serious elements of publishing a book are the established deadlines for the various stages of that process. And the very first deadline in the process is yours as the author. It's the date that you agree to in your contract for you to submit your completed manuscript to the publisher. And I can only give you one piece of advice about that deadline. Don't miss it. Well, have you ever looked up the definition of the word deadline in the dictionary? Well, I'm the curious type, so I looked it up. Webster's dictionary defines it as a line drawn within or around a prison that a prisoner passes at the risk of being shot. Now, I wish I could tell you that it's really different in publishing, but it's really not.
It's
In truth, the entire publishing process is just one giant set of very specific and pesky details and deadlines. And there's really very little wiggle room in that schedule. If you miss one deadline, it really throws everything else out of whack. Those dates really are inviolate, and you need to be certain that you turn in your work on time or ahead of time. I'd like to just give you one little personal story about that that might be meaningful to you. Several years ago, I had a couple of gift books published by Gibson Books, and the publisher of that company was a very bright woman named Marilyn Moore. Eventually, Gibson Books was sold to Thomas Nelson, so Marilyn moved to Guidepost Books in New York City and became their publisher. Well, a few years later, my literary agent, proposed a really large project for me to manage for Guidepost Books. And when Marilyn saw the proposal, she told her editorial director they should definitely work with me. And you know why? What she remembered about me was not that my writing was wonderful. She remembered that I always turned my manuscripts in on time. And that one fact helped land an ongoing project for my publishing team that covered 33 books and about 5 years. Well, I'm not telling you that to show off. I'm just telling you that story to emphasize how important it is to meet and observe deadlines in the publishing business. It is your job as an author, just as it is your responsibility to be on time to your regular job. And it becomes part of your author reputation. Well, I'm often asked by other people, where do you get your ideas for books? Where do they come from? People will say, do they just come to you out of the blue? Do you get ideas from things you see or hear or read? Do you get them from TV or billboards? Do you see them in the movies or personal experiences? Are you inspired by nature or watching children play or seeing older folks struggling to get around? And I have to tell you, the answer to that is yes.
Yes.
To all those things and many others. My question is, how can you not get ideas from those places? But I believe the answer is because you may not have yet developed, as they say in the news business, a nose for the news. In other words, an intuition about books, an author's sixth sense about what works and what doesn't in the industry. Perhaps you don't yet have your finger on the pulse of today's readers, what their needs are, what the issues are that they face, what their hopes and dreams are. Well, so if you don't have that sixth sense yet, can you get it? Can you develop it? Can you learn how to do it? And I have to say yes and no. Some authors seem to have it in spades. They just get it when it comes to choosing books, ideas for books, and entitling books. Other authors seem to struggle with that skill a bit. I know for me, it has developed over time. It's a bit like using your muscles. The more you exercise and use the skill, the stronger your book sense or your author intuition becomes. And another way to increase that is the more you study successful books and authors and publish in the industry, the more you'll learn about what works and what doesn't. It's as much education as it is inspiration, concentrated effort, just as any career demands. You can't learn to be an author by wishing and hoping to be one. Any more than you can become a doctor by wishing you were one. You really have to work hard at it. You have to hone your skill. You have to learn the industry, which a lot of authors don't really want to bother to do, but you must learn the industry. Learn the specifics of the genre in which you want to work. What are those? What are the rules? And you have to continually increase your knowledge about publishing and about your genre and about grammar if needed. Most of all, you have to write. You have to write something, anything, but write regularly. Now, I have to tell you, some writing experts, they call themselves, say that to be a great writer, you have to write every single day. Whether you feel like it or not, whether you have anything to say that day or not, whether you have time that day or not, they want you to write every day. And perhaps that's true for some people, especially new authors, it might be true for, but it has never been true for me. Frankly, that's just a luxury I can't afford. Would I love to sit and write every day? Oh, absolutely. I'd like nothing better. Unfortunately, I also like to pay my bills.
That's right.
Yeah, so there are days when other priorities really have to come first. For instance, some days I spend planning a new book, or perhaps I'm writing a formal book proposal so that I can present my book to the industry. Maybe I'm doing phone conferences with my agent or my editor or my publisher, or perhaps I'm reading and responding to a book contract or a reader's letter, or maybe I'm answering a publisher's request for marketing information, or working on my author website to keep it current, or creating presentations for events like this one, and other writing related tasks. So the business of writing is far more complex than just the writing itself, although most of us would rather just write. So I have learned to write on demand. I write when writing needs to be done. Sometimes it's a story, sometimes it's a book, sometimes it's cover ad copy for a book, sometimes it's a carefully worded letter to an agent or a publisher, sometimes it's an email, sometimes it's for pay, sometimes it's for pleasure, and sometimes it's because I cannot not write it. I'm compelled to write it. Well, now maybe I'm just the oddball that operates differently than everybody else. I really don't know. I just know what works for me. And you are the only one who will know what works best for you. I say figure that out. Do that. Don't be defined or confined by what other writers do or say you must do. Be who God designed you to be. Carry out your mission. Don't try to be Max Lucado or Beth Moore. We already have their voices in the industry. We don't need to hear them again. We need to hear new voices. We need to hear your voice. So follow your own writing passion. Write the book that only you can write. Your story, your point of view, your characters. Then I have to tell you, you will be a success in the eyes of God, even if you're never published.
Wow, that's good.
So I would like to just offer one caution to you as authors. I have learned not to expect perfection in the publishing industry. Producing books is done by ordinary people, just like you and me. They are doing their very best to serve God in the way He's called them to serve. And so do we strive for perfection in the books we're producing? Of course we do, every day. But do we ever achieve absolute perfection? Rarely. Rarely. Now, if Jesus were your editor, then you could expect perfection, right? Unfortunately, he was the only perfect person to ever live. And he figured out this wasn't the place for him, so he left. And that left the rest of us here to cut each other some slack and learn how to work together and respect each other and depend on each other. I have to tell you, here's an example. This little book is called My Little Bible. It's an example of something that can go wrong in publishing. Okay, so this is my most successful book to date. It has sold more than 2 million copies.
Wow.
And it's still doing quite well. It's produced by Thomas Nelson.
Oh my goodness.
Well, as I was browsing on Amazon one day, I saw a copy of this little book being sold for 99 cents. And I couldn't figure out why they would sell this book for such a low price, so I bought it. And when it arrived, I immediately saw the reason. The cover is upside down to the text. So here's the cover right side up, but when you open the book up, can you see?
Oh my goodness.
It's upside down. Well, you know, I could have really gotten angry about that and upset and all that, but actually what I did was laugh. Because it wasn't the first mistake I'd ever seen happen in publishing. This particular problem probably occurred at the bindery where the cover is attached to the text, and they just got them flipped. Now, I say this to you because I'm asking you to be kind and congenial with your publishing team. They truly do their very best because their reputation's on the line as well as yours. Their family income depends on the books doing well that they work on. So they do as much as they can, but they are just as imperfect as you and I are. Now think about this. If you're expecting perfection from them, why do they need to copy edit your manuscript? Did it come in perfectly? Probably not. Why do they need to proofread our work? And yet we expect them to be perfect. So here's my personal take on this. Don't expect perfection in the publishing industry. Then when you do see it, you can be happily surprised. But when you don't see it, you won't be surprised or totally dismayed by it. It really reminds me of my very favorite publishing story. An ad appeared in the Warrentown, Pennsylvania newspaper one time, and it was from Hope Publishing Company. And it said, "Notice to everyone who bought our new book, Skydiving for Fun and Safety, please make the following correction on page 46. The words state zip code should read pull ripcord."
Oh, pull ripcord. Oh my.
Oops. Well, so sometimes things do go wrong in publishing. Well, writing a book is a great adventure, isn't it? But, you know, it's like the old country song that says, some days are diamonds, some days are stone. It's exciting. It's fun. But it's also a lot of hard work, and it can be daunting and scary, right? You know, Winston Churchill once described writing this way. He said, writing is an adventure. To begin with, it is a toy and an amusement. Then it becomes a mistress. Then it becomes a master. Then it becomes a tyrant. The last phase is that just as you are about to be reconciled to your servitude, you kill the monster and fling him out to the public.
That's funny.
Well, that's a great definition of book publishing in my mind. And as a new author, or even as a previously published author, you probably still have lots of questions about the complicated and confusing road to publication. Some of the questions that I'm most often asked are these. What's the proper way to prepare my manuscript? Which publishing path is right for me? Well, what about copyrights and contracts? Well, what do literary agents do and how are they paid? How do I create a formal book proposal or write a dynamic query letter? The one the most often is, how do I market and sell my book? And here's one they rarely ask, but should. What writing expenses can I deduct on my income taxes? It's a great question for this weekend, isn't it? And so many other questions that come up. Well, as I mentioned earlier, the internet and social media are saturated with so-called publishing experts, and they offer answers to these questions. But the advice I see them giving is often conflicting and confusing. It only frustrates new authors, and it takes them down the wrong path a lot of times. And that path leads to failure for them. And then those disheartened authors decide that publishing just doesn't work. And truthfully, I agree with them that bad publishing doesn't work. But publishing done correctly works just as well as it has for centuries. Well, as you may have found, the learning curve for book publishing can be completely overwhelming, can't it?
Mm-hmm.
But you don't have to learn everything before you begin. I like to say that publishing is like the CIA. It's on a need-to-know basis.
I don't need to know all of
Well, and yeah, there are a lot of things you do need to know as a first or second or third time author, but there are a lot of other things you don't have to know right now. For instance, you don't have to know how to manage a 25 or 30 book career.
Mm-mm.
You can learn those things as you go along. I remember when I wrote my first book, and yes, I can remember that far back.
You got a sharp mind.
Yeah, you got it. In those days, I perfectly embodied the quote that says, I was ignorance on fire. I had no idea what I was doing, but I was doing it with all my might.
Hello.
And any of you relate to that? Hello.
Yep.
So let me offer you 4 secrets to creating a great book that gives your book a chance at becoming a bestseller. First of all, you have to have the right credentials. So before you begin to write the book that you have in mind to do, ask yourself these 3 questions. Am I really qualified to write this book? What are my credentials to write on this topic? And why should people trust what I have to say on this subject anyway? Well, you can always write your own story, of course. Nobody else can write your story as well as you can. However, may I suggest to you that you not try to write a medical book if you're not a doctor or a highly trained medical professional? Don't try to write a scientific book if you're not a degreed scientist or an experienced scientist. In our industry, I would say, don't try to write a theological book if you're not a theologian. And by all means, don't write a book about parenting if you're not a parent.
Oh, yeah.
Now, why is that true? Well, because people can't trust what you have to say on a topic for which you do not have the right credentials or qualifications. They can't trust it. And they won't spend their hard-earned money on a book they aren't sure they can trust. Would you? Well, even if you have many other impressive credentials, your credentials need to match the subject matter that you want to address. So first of all, be sure you have the right credentials. Secondly, in the publishing industry, we say content is king. People primarily buy books for the content they offer. They subconsciously ask themselves, what's in this for me? Or what's this going to do for me anyway? Or better yet, why should I spend the $20 I have in my pocket on this book instead of one of the other books I see? You know, publishers today are looking for authors with something new to say, or at least someone who can say something old in a new way. So offer a new perspective. Come at the subject from a different direction. Honestly, this is a bit more of a challenge in the Christian industry than it is in the general market industry, because almost everything we do in the Christian industry is based on one book, and that's the Bible, isn't it? And as the Bible itself says, there is nothing new under the sun. So it's important to find new ways of saying old and familiar things to our audience. So content needs to be relational. It needs to be something that meets your book's audience where they live. It needs to be relevant and helpful and informative. Or its goal may simply be to entertain as it informs. And if so, well, then it needs to be entertaining. Content also needs to be impacting. So perhaps it's mind-changing material. Maybe it's life-altering or life-improving information. It just needs to impact the reader in some powerful or meaningful way. And also, content needs to be accurate. Now, that may seem silly to say, but it needs to be carefully researched and verified. Content needs to be true. The sources need to be carefully noted where you get things that you may quote. And copyright permissions need to be done as legally required. Yeah. So content is king. And I can speak about the content side, and we talk about copyrights and permissions because I spent several years in the legal field as well. And I can tell you that it's not something to play around with. So content is king. Well, third, if content is king, then I like to say that story is queen. You know, Mary Poppins was right when she said a spoonful of sugar makes the medicine go down. So admit it with me that none of us like to take our medicine, right? But if you can make my cough syrup taste like honey or oranges or grapes, well, then maybe I can get it down. And in nonfiction books, stories are the sugar and facts are the medicine. You know, stories entice readers to keep turning the pages because they want to see what happens in the story, what happens next. Meanwhile, readers will take their medicine and learn what you want them to know as the stories keep them turning the pages. So as an author, I highly recommend that you learn to write powerful, intriguing, and applicable stories to help readers digest the factual content you want them to learn. Stories are the sugar, so sprinkle them generously through your book. Well, finally, number 4, quality is imperative. Now, I have to tell you, the mistake I see new authors making most often in today's publishing world is going for cheap and fast or do it all myself, rather than making sure that their books are top quality. But in my experience, that's one of the worst mistakes an author can make, especially a new author. So here are 3 suggestions about quality. First of all, don't be satisfied with less than a top quality book. If you are, I promise you, it will come back to haunt you. Readers today are smart and discerning. If they find a lot of typos, awkward sentences, cookie cutter looking covers, and poor interior design, they will either not buy the book at all, which is likely, or they will start to read it and then they will lay it aside, never getting to the message you really want them to learn. They will not wade through poor quality, even if the content is good. Would you? So number 2, follow the rules of quality. In order to achieve industry standards. Will it cost you a bit more to do that? Yeah, probably. But will it pay off in the long run? Mm-hmm. Yes, it will. So the Bible for book production in both the Christian and the general market area is the Chicago Manual of Style. This is what it looks like.
Oh, goodness.
Currently, it's in its 17th edition. It's published by the University of Chicago Press. They're sort of the gatekeepers for quality in book production. Now, this is the basic manual that is followed by every Christian and general market publisher that I know. Now, I have to tell you, Chicago is not light reading before bedtime. It is a full-fledged editorial reference book. See how thick it is?
Mhm.
Okay, so, but it is something that aspiring writers should keep beside them on their desk and refer to it very often. The best writers and editors that I know are thoroughly familiar with the rules and guidelines of Chicago. And you should be too, if you want to succeed in the long run. Well, third, don't try to do everything yourself. Now, I'm sure some of you will not want to hear this, okay? But based on, because of what's happening in today's publishing environment, and there are a few exceptions to this rule, but I can't apologize for telling you the truth about it, so here goes. Publishing is intended to be a teamwork effort. It's not a do-it-all-yourself process. And it's true that God gave some of us the gift of writing. He also gave other people gifts of editing, proofreading, project management, graphic design, marketing, printing, and a lot of other things. If you try to do everything yourself, you will likely shoot yourself in the foot. Because you don't take advantage of all the gifts with which God has blessed the publishing industry. There's an old sports adage that says, individuals play the game, but teams beat the odds. And I really hate to be the one to burst your bubble, but it's highly unlikely that God gave you all the gifts.
Oh, that's true. Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought.
Yeah. I know he didn't give all the gifts to me. And even though I've had lots of books published through the years, I would never try to do one on my own by myself because I don't have all the gifts. It's just really a bad idea, in my opinion and in my experience. Quality is the mark of a successful author. And my personal mantra, and therefore the guiding light for my company, is this: we serve a first-class God, and he deserves first-class products to glorify him. He gave his all for us as we are celebrating this weekend. So he doesn't deserve cheap and fast products in response to his gift. Well, number 4, I recommend that you overcome your fear of failure. Hello. Being an author can be scary, right? I remember how nervous I was when my first gift book came out, and I had put my thoughts and my heart out there for all the world to read. It was a little unnerving and frightening, I can tell you. And I was thinking, what if nobody likes it? What if the reviewers give my book bad reviews? What if I completely fail as a published author? Well, one of my very favorite quotes is from the movie, The Princess Diaries. It says, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but rather the judgment that something else is more important than fear." The brave may not live forever, but the cautious do not live at all. From now on, you'll be traveling the road between who you think you are and who you can be. The key is to allow yourself to make the journey. So remember, in the willingness to fail, the extraordinary will often appear. And as Christian authors, we must have the courage to write the message God has given us. Someone's soul may be at stake.
That's right.
Well, I hope something I've said today has been helpful.